All right, everyone. I am here with John Dunfee from JMD Apologetics. If you followed us on social media, I wasn't sure when this stream was going to happen just because of I was doing some stuff, and you know how life goes. But regardless of what's going on, we are here. We are going to be talking about some dealing with doubts today. How's it going, John?
It's going pretty good. How you doing yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a hectic day, but I'm happy to be here. Always enjoy talking with people about God, so can't complain. Life's good. So let's just to start off, can you talk a little bit about if someone doesn't know who you are, what you do, what's going on with John Dunfee at JMD Apologetics?
Yeah, so I took a little break for most of May, a little April, I think, and I'm changing my curriculum. I can't pronounce the word. Basically, I've been doing videos for 3 years on apologetics topics, and now I want to do more stuff in ministry. I'm still doing apologetic stuff. That's still my main priority, but doing more stuff with the whole ministry side of what it means to run a ministry. So it's mostly an apologetics channel. I've done a bunch of live streams of some videos on answering questions concerning the Christian faith and God's existence and so on. And recently I've gone through a change with these doubts of I need to make a little bit of a change with my ministry approach. So that's what's going on at JMD Apologetics 101 right now.
Good stuff. Roxby, Ethan, everyone that's here, how's it going? So today we're just going to be talking about dealing with doubts. It's just going to be kind of a probably not super high scholarly discussion, just more of a general conversation. We're going to look at these things. I know John has a big video on doubts coming out at some point. Do you have any update on when that video is going to come out?
I'm hoping next week. I'm like 40 minutes in.
Wow. 40. How long is the video going to be in total?
I don't know.
There's a lot that could be said. So just give us a little bit of an overview. Like when you're looking into the idea of doubts and understanding these things more, what's the big picture?
Yeah, so what I have in mind with this video, I've covered intellectual doubts. I have not had that many intellectual doubts. I have questions that, most of the time you don't have answers, but they're not significant questions that attack the truth of Christianity. But this video is mainly focusing on emotional doubts, and those can fall under passive doubts, which I think are issues that people deal with, don't know how to deal with because the church doesn't seem open with actually talking about those discussions in people's lives. And when those doubts come by, they don't know how to handle them, and they just completely destroy their faith because they weren't, the ones out there, the youth group leaders. I'm reading this one book called You Lost Me, and sometimes a big youth group could affect that because there's too many people, you don't get to know them, and sometimes those going through those doubts don't feel comfortable to reach out and actually talk to people and seek counsel. And I'm not claiming most churches don't deal with that, but a lot don't and create these passive doubts. And a passive doubt would be, let's take an example, relationships. Where is God during these times in which, let's say, relationship fails, and you're like, God, where were you during that, and stuff like that. And there's many other life issues, and people will have doubts concerning that. But I think the problem becomes, when you take that doubt and make it an idol in your life and let that control you instead of the goodness of God, and you forget what God has already done for you and what He's done at the cross and so on. Another type of doubt would be institutional doubts, which would be sort of, you look at the church and you're just like, oh my goodness, this place is filled with hypocrites. So it's neither an intellectual doubt nor a passive doubt or emotional doubt. You're just like, really? You're claiming that this thing we call the church is claiming to be the messengers for God, and they're acting this way, and that would just cause people to doubt either the consistency or is it even worth it in my life? So you can have doubts like that. So those are 3 doubts I've been thinking about: these emotional passive doubts, intellectual doubts, and institutional doubts.
Yeah, there's a lot that we can unpack here and we'll probably discuss as we go through this stream. So I'm curious, what kind of inspired this video? You talked about it a little bit, but just give you a little bit further and what's the inspiration behind this video and everything you're doing regarding doubts?
Yeah, I won't go into the specifics, but let's just say I was having doubts myself for a couple of months and really a year, and I was sort of doubting the goodness of God. And I ended up finding out no, it was something I wanted, and I treated it as a need, in which it wasn't. And I put that need above my relationship with God and worship of God. And because of that, that was really what was hurting me. It wasn't the goodness of God that was missing. It was just me not looking to the goodness of God. And I would read a Bible chapter a night and pray, but like that never really helped, because I didn't take more initiative with how I actually want to live my life, and live out what God has for my life and so on. So basically, these doubts, I did pray, and I think God did answer those prayers for answers to these doubts. I pray for wisdom every night, and we can get into how wisdom helps and stuff. But basically, some doubts myself, and because of that experience, experience is powerful. It definitely changed my mind and my scope of what I want to do. And I've just been talking with other people dealing with similar issues, and it's just like, yeah, this is more clear for me now.
Yeah, I mean, I think something really important to realize is doubts are so real. They're so common. Like, and it's not bad to doubt. Like, I think a lot of times, you think that once you've looked into apologetics, some people might be like, okay, well, I shouldn't doubt anymore. I have the answers I was looking for. But that's really not the case. And that's more the intellectual side. And obviously, I know you're focusing more on the emotional side with doubts and everything that you've been studying. And that same thing is so true, because I think for a lot of people, they typically, their first doubts about the faith come through an emotional reason rather than an intellectual. Like, it's like, oh, this person broke my heart, or why did this person, which could lean more intellectual, but why did this person die, or does God love me? Like something along those lines. So like, for someone that I don't think there'd be many Christians who would take this position, but for a Christian who doesn't believe that these doubt, like understanding doubts, especially from people like in our generation, is important. Like, what do you say to someone who doesn't think doubts are an important topic in the church?
I say they're plugging their ears and just yapping off what they believe themselves, and not actually taking other people seriously, and not staying in according to Scripture. I would say they're missing the whole point of love and ministry itself. And if they're not having doubts, then they either haven't gone through something themselves, or like they've deluded themselves in some sense. And I'm not saying they're not a Christian, but I would definitely claim that their mindset isn't in the right place. I mean, Jesus, who's omniscient, he dealt with a lot of people's doubts in the New Testament. And like, he's God. And if God takes those doubts seriously, then I think we should.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So if you're cool with it, I think what would be good to do is we could kind of walk through these three types of doubts that you talk about, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And I saw there was a question. We were from Skeptical Mantis. We will do some questions at the end, but for now, we're just going to do this conversation. We'll get to that at the end. But let's just walk through these three types of doubts, go into a little more detail, discuss them. So,
to answer his question, it's between 0 and 100.
All right, fair enough. Well, actually, if it's between 0 and 100, then it's actually from 1 to 99. But let's walk through some of these doubts. Just choose one of the categories to start off with, and let's just talk about it for a little bit.
Sure, intellectual doubts. I'm not covering those that much in this video. I like how Ravi Zacharias makes the distinction between questions and doubts. And, yes, I give it the category of intellectual doubt, because if it's not dealt with, it will just turn into something that, if it's not answered, your confidence in Christianity, you could say, lowers because it hasn't been answered sufficiently. So one intellectual doubt I always struggled with. I was taught with young earth creationism, and I was almost taught as core and, part of mere Christianity. It's not by any means. I doubted that. I would just look at Genesis 1 and 2, and if you interpret them the way young earth creationists do, in which I think they interpret them the wrong hermeneutical approach in ancient cultural context, I think contradictions do result from that, and I think they just give ad hoc explanations of that, and they assert things in there that aren't in the text, like a water dome and stuff like that. But when they're not answered, and a lot of the time, my doubts are always shunned when it came to that, and like, it wasn't until my youth group leader in high school actually took those doubts seriously that actually led me and gave me a stronger faith. Now, it wasn't any sort of emotional doubts. He's helped me with those as well in the past. But these intellectual doubts, I think people are, if they have sincere questions and are seeking sincere answers, then I think they'll get them. But the problem is they don't have the right materials or places to go, and the place to go is either the church or, a youth group leader or whatnot, or, a Christian who could just be your friend and, hey, look, I know what apologetics is, maybe I can answer some of those questions. And I think I used to think that intellectual doubts were a very strong reason for why people leave the church, and I'm truly convinced that is probably the smallest reason why people leave the church. I think hypocrisy and these passive doubts are more reasons because they never really had counsel, because the church didn't make it clear, hey, if you're dealing with doubts, you can talk to us or develop friendships, and that's very important. And because they treat it like an institution almost, then that friendship in Christ and so on just becomes irrelevant to them in these doubts. But I would say intellectual doubts are questions, not actual doubts in the sense of you're doubting like the goodness of God, you're doubting God's faithfulness. So they're doubts that result from questions in that sense. So I would accept Ravi Zacharias' distinction there, questions and doubts. Now, if it becomes so serious that it goes beyond a question and you do question the truthfulness of it, sure, that'll be a doubt. But questions like, young earth creationism and stuff, I won't call those doubts. I just say, yeah, you're looking into your faith more intellectually rigorously. And then, good. Oh, no.
Were you going to transition to the next type of doubt, or were you going to?
Oh, no, you can ask questions about intellectual doubts and stuff.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts. But one of the things you brought up was really interesting was the whole young earth creationism thing, because it's kind of like, for me, it was a similar idea. I mean, so I didn't really grow up in a household that really was promoting that, or a church that really, I don't know, really, I never really looked into these things much before, right after 10th grade is when I started looking into these things. And I thought for about a year that all Christians were young earth creationists, because I just didn't know where to look. The only places online that I couldn't, this was this would have been 3 or 4 years ago now. If you asked me 4 years ago, who's William Lane Craig, I'd have no idea who you're talking about. So, it's I think with intellectual doubts, a lot of it's just pointing people in the right direction with where to go. Because for a lot of these common things that we first come up with, what about young earth creationism, or the problem of evil, or what about people who never heard the gospel? Some of the most common things that we think of in the intellectual circles, there's really good answers. People just don't know where to look. I see that a lot.
Yeah, and I think, not enough churches have apologetics, but I think more churches have more apologetics than classical apologists actually give credit for. But maybe it's because of their work that more people have apologetics. But as you were talking about there, I never even heard of William Lane Craig. And when I was blown away by this idea of old earth creationism and a local flood and all this stuff by Hugh Ross, my mind was just, I didn't know what to make of that. Because all I was taught was young earth creationism. Literally, I didn't even hear about these ideas until I was 16 or 17, maybe even 15. But at first I challenged it because I won't say indoctrinated, because one church I went to for a while, they were a bit that way, but my parents never really indoctrinated me. Mm-hmm. But it was definitely shunned if you had these intellectual doubts, and I don't think those are the right ones to shun. I definitely don't think emotional doubts should be shunned at all. But if you let that control you, and now you just question the goodness of God on a universal scale because of this one thing you didn't get, or this one need you had. Now, obviously, I'm not. There are cases in which if someone dies, a loved one dies. I would never say that on that level. But let's say maybe dating just fails. It's pretty ridiculous to just start doubting God's faithfulness and goodness and so on because of that. If you let that control you, obviously the emotions are fine to go through for a week or two or whatever. But if you let that control you, then That's where the problem comes in, because you're putting emotional needs above God. And God is really the one thing you do actually need, and the only thing, well, not the only thing you need. You need family, friends, food, shelter. God cares about those things. So,
yeah. Before we transition to like kind of the emotional doubts you've been talking about, one thought on intellectual doubts that I kind of thought of is I remember heading into my senior year of high school, I read Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and that was the first time ever I read about these like different theories about Genesis, and like my mind was blown. I was like, wow, there's like this gap theory and theistic evolution, old earth creation. I'm like, there's so many different things. I'm like, wow, this is actually like crazy. Like my mind was blown because it's just things that we don't see in church. And I mean, I don't know where you're at church wise, but like we really don't have many churches that have Sunday schools, or like it's like usually like you go there, you get the sermon, and you know that's just it basically. That's the church structure, at least in central Pennsylvania for the most part. But yeah, emotional doubts. What would you say to someone who's kind of like going through these emotional doubts, where they had something happen in their life where they just like question God's goodness or something along those lines? Like, what do you say to someone who's going through something like that?
yeah, it really depends on what it is. If it's something very low and like something you need to just get over it, I wouldn't tell them that at first, but like I'd just be a friend to them and, give them advice and, be there for them and actually care and, develop that loving relationship and so on. Not because I have to, but because I care. And I've done that with a few people recently, and it is actually fulfilling. Let's see here. I would say don't doubt the goodness of God. I'm gonna say doubt the confidence in yourself and your own understanding of what you take this doubt to mean for you. I know people who think, yeah, I believe there's supernatural things. I believe there's complete evil and complete good, and the complete evil, punishes me. But yet, everything has a reason. I just ask questions. I do it in a sincere way. I don't challenge their beliefs. I just ask them to, just think outside the box for the second. And it's helpful, but, it really just depends on where they're coming from. If it's completely emotional, I don't bring up apologetics. I just develop that friendship, and I'll share scripture and God's love and what God has done for me and so on. And, testimony works better with other people. I wouldn't say, because of my testimony or other people's testimony, you should become a Christian. I'd say look at the evidence for yourself and make that conclusion for yourself. And any questions you have, you're more than welcome to ask people like me or Zach. But again, context, but always you do it in a loving, gentle, respectful way. 1 Peter 3:15. And also I would help them with their physical needs. Christians are dualists and are just like, no, spiritual is all that matters. No, your physical needs, your material needs matter just as much. Because if that wasn't the case, we won't be body and soul.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good points you make. I think when dealing with emotional doubts, there's a couple of things we can look at. One's kind of like as a friend who has someone dealing with emotional doubts. Before we get, so a question for BDS, we'll get to at the end. Good night, Benjamin. But as we keep on going, so when we have a friend that's going through emotional doubts, I think you're like spot on with like just being a friend, being there for people is so important. Like it's so important to have at least one, and it's even nice to have 2 or 3 people you can just totally trust with everything, because it's just kind of like you can lay it on them and it's safe, and it helps with those emotional doubts because it gives you someone to like process your questions with, whether it's about like God's goodness or God's love or something like those lines. And then for someone who's going through these doubts, especially in this emotional category, I think one of the most important things is just like spending time in the Word with God, spending time in prayer, because like the more time you spend reading your Bible and the more time you spend in prayer, the more connected you're going to be with God. You're going to understand His testimony to the world better and things like that. So I think it's so important to really, when we're going through doubt, to really be in the Word. Yeah.
And with the emotions, never shun their emotions, especially if you've ever gone through anything. Recently, I've had people shun some emotions I went through. And, people from that point of view, they're either hurt with God or, just claim to be, yeah, I'm a Christian. Then when they do that, it's just like, no, you're relying on your own understanding and what you take to be the right method and how to deal with people like that. But and at that point, you're the fool and not listening to the words of the wise, which I just go to the book of Proverbs with wisdom and how to deal with stuff like that. But yeah, no, emotions are completely, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be mad. Just don't, in the long run, I mean, obviously you can't control those emotions, but like eventually as things slow down, I think you have more control over them. So I would also say, be clear with them. I don't think you're in the right state of mind to be thinking about these things after a couple of days they go through. When you first tell them, that's just going to go over their head. But I think when someone is truly rational, they realize those things. But it just depends on the impact and what it is.
Yeah. A lot of good points. Let's go, Nick Quiet. We will get to that question at the end. I think that, sorry, I'm just trying to process all my thoughts here. I think it's so important that you talk about how we can't control our emotions, which is very true, but we need to learn to not let our emotions control us. Carl, I like to joke with him about it because we played basketball in high school, and there'd be times where he did that kind of just in a fun way, just playing basketball in high school. But I mean, it's so important that we have control over our emotions and really just like learn how to process things, because like if you don't know how to control your emotions when you're going through doubts, you may just get angry or frustrated. And you'll put that out on someone or something that doesn't deserve the output of your emotions. So knowing how to like distribute your emotions is such an important thing when dealing with doubts, and knowing that like when you feel sad or when you feel angry, like not just to in it's Philippians, it talks about casting our anxieties on God. And yeah, so like just like knowing that we can put our frustrations on God and we don't have to carry them all on our own, I think is a really important thing to understand.
And recently I thought I was a lover of wisdom before, and then I realized no, I just knew what wisdom was, but true wisdom is actually applying it to your life. And I think the more you apply wisdom and apply truth and make that a priority over these secondary needs, I think you control your emotions better and only get emotional over things that are worth like that. Like just hearing the actual true message of the gospel is very emotional, and sometimes it does make me cry. Whether people want to say, "Oh, you're just emotional," well, okay, let's next time I see you crying, I won't make fun of you, but it's because of the truthfulness of it. It's not because I use it as a mental crutch or anything like that.
Yeah, a lot of good points. Is there anything you want to add in this section as we talk about emotional doubts before we transition to your third and final category?
Yeah, I won't say those are my only categories, but right now they are. But I just mentioned a mental crutch, and this may offend some people, and that's not my intention. I posted this on Facebook the other day, and I think these secondary emotional needs become our mental crutches. And religion is just a secondary effect if someone uses that as a mental crutch. I think we let our emotions control us, so we don't have to do in-depth thinking about that. If you let them control you in the long end. But I think those become the idol and crutch in our life, because that's almost the only way you know how to deal with it if it controls you, basically, and you don't seek counsel with others who are in the church or just even good friends. Like I'd give the same advice to atheists and non-believers. I wouldn't say some of the points I make is purely in a Christian context. I think Christians probably deal a little bit more since they believe in the goodness of God more. And when it happens to them, they're just like, it's a test of faith. While the atheists, they probably was just like, yeah, I went through these doubts. I just don't believe in God because I doubt His goodness or whatnot, or maybe intellectual reasons. But yeah.
So what do you mean by second? Can you just, for someone that's like, you hear this idea of a secondary emotional need, what do you specifically mean by secondary emotional needs?
Yeah. So needs, firstly, that are not necessary. The best example that comes to mind is our relationships in the eros sense. The other three loves in the four loves, I think, are need loves. I think you need friends. I think you need love of things. And I think you need family and agape love. Agape love is God love. But eros, strangely enough, is not the one thing you want. And if you treat it as a need, that becomes an idol in your life, and you let that control your life. And when you're in that search, your search is going to be tainted while realizing, no, this isn't something I need. It's something I want because it's a good thing. I have to do this the right way. And I would just say that's one of those little, it can become very emotional, and it rules your life. And that's a secondary emotional need that I think many people put above God.
Yeah, good stuff, man. You want to transition here to your third category that you have in your video about doubts?
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know if I'll go into this into the video. Maybe I'll do a separate video on church hypocrisy. But I see many people who claim to be Christian, and then they just lie to you right to your face, and you have many conversations about theology and philosophy and the goodness of God and the Trinity and all this stuff, and then they have this type of shallow faith in which they either have an inch-wide faith in which, yeah, I'm a Christian because I was raised that way, or, I've had good stuff happen in my life, or, they have a mile-wide faith in which they have all this knowledge, and they're very unwise because they have the knowledge and they're conscious of it, but yet they don't use it to actually make huge decisions in their life. And because of that, I think those who have the mile depth knowledge of faith, who don't treat it as a faith, just have this shallow faith and develop this type of arrogance because they have all this knowledge, per se, that they can talk down to others who act in a way that isn't wise to them, their own understanding. And that's where I think some people will shun other people's emotions and so on. And I think the church is filled with many people like that. And just many Christians, I think, are egoists in the sense they believe because they have a self-interest, and maybe it's either a mental crutch, or maybe they benefit from the church or whatnot, or they just benefit from the beliefs themselves and they don't actually care about truth or what it means to be a Christian. And I think the church is filled with many of those. And yeah, if it can cause doubts in the institution, and therefore maybe not the truthfulness, but the application of it to my life, because it's just like these people believe this, and yet they're not actually applying it to their life. And it's just like, why would, maybe it's true, but like, why would, if it's this pragmatically useless here, since the hypocrisy is real, then how does it even apply to my life? Why should I live my life that way? And I think it would almost be like the transition from belief to belief in, and because of those hypocrites, they cause doubts in that sense, not, not challenging the goodness of God or whether God actually exists, but the sort of middle ground. And firstly, I think a way is apologetics to help deal with that, because you literally address the church, the hypocrites in the church, with apologetics, but just good doctrine and actually good application and making it relevant to people's lives. And the church focuses way too much on hell and the afterlife a lot of the time, and misses the point of the gospel. The now, how does this help me now, and why should I act as Christ did? Because the church will ask, what would Jesus do? And it's just like, no, what did he do, and how can I apply that in my life? Mm-hmm. And how can I follow God and so on, pick up my cross. And I think a lot of this results from the prosperity gospel. And who's the dude with the $20 million plane?
Is that Osteen or Copeland?
No, Copeland. Osteen, I thought Osteen was bad. Copeland is just, oh my goodness. Like a man worth $300 million, I think. It's just like, yeah, that definitely comes off as hip. And, I got no problem. I think the Bible allows for richness, but because I think, the eye through the eye of the needle, Campbell Bit is talking about, if you make the riches of your life an idol, then and that would almost possibly be an emotional need, because you need this to be happy, and it's just like happiness you're seeking, and you're seeking it in the wrong place, and because you made it your idol and not search for it in the right place, aka God, or just truth, or life itself. And good, I think everyone knows good. I think everyone can know truth and virtue, and I think people can apply that, and that's why I think many non-believers can be happy in this life. But yeah, just with all the hypocrites like Andrew Copeland, I think, who has all that money and doesn't, actually use it for the church almost, or actual ministry. I think that just puts a lot of bad taste in people's mouths. And, you can almost view racism as the same way. Maybe just a few people who happen to be that race do, crimes or whatnot. Then all the stereotypes start. I think we have that with the church. Just look at the Westboro Baptist Church. 12 people paint the gospel as this hateful message that God made all of us just to hate us because we sin. It's just like, no, God actually wants you in this relationship, and that's why he gets upset, because you've lost something. He didn't need to die on the cross. There's nothing necessary about that. In fact, it almost seems illogical, because justice would say, yeah, people sin. You rendering one's due, but yet we're not rendered that for some reason. And that's honestly, the Trinity is confusing, but that boggles my mind even more just thinking about the whole message of the gospel.
There's so many good points you bring up here. A lot of interesting stuff to talk about, and I think this is probably one of the more common objections you'll see against Christianity as a whole. You say this pastor, or this elder, or this priest, or whoever is a hypocrite because they're doing this when they're preaching the gospel. And I think this is something that's just so just real. There's a lot to be said. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Politics, obviously, it can be sticky, and I think it's hard to comment on politics without making somebody angry.
I love that you brought up politics, because my mind was going the same place. People treat religion and the church just like how they treat politics, because one person, because you've made this idol, you identify as a Democrat and almost put your entire identity in that, or conservative, or libertarian, and put your identity in that. And whenever someone from the other side makes this bad, does something bad, you treat all Republicans or Democrats that way, or libertarians or liberals. I do take certain political stances, but I value truth more than politics, and people value that almost identity point they make for themselves over truth. And that's why I think we have a lot of corrupt people in politics. But that's sort of my view on politics. I'm more of a classic Plato's Republic. Let's have a philosopher king or a virtuous one to control his stuff. But honestly, that's not going to happen anytime soon, because most people aren't like that. And people who want power, have that much power, usually aren't virtuous in the first place.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of Christians that if they were as passionate about God as they are about their politics, we'd have a lot more souls won for Christ.
I think it's almost because of that love of politics, it becomes just like you're a Christian, but yet you almost agree with certain political views that disagree with, Christian doctrine. I honestly do think the right probably aligns more, but the way people on the right are hypocrites, I think almost because they identify with those Christian values that they supposedly hold, that almost causes more hypocrisy in the church, because, I think a good example, I'm not going to give too many political opinions, because for some reason political opinions is diminished more than religious opinions. But I think people have this mentality with politics, and they do the same thing with religion in general, especially towards Christianity, because of certain people in politics. And I think the biggest mistake is letting politics rule almost who you are or who you identify with, and you ground your values in that party instead of truth and moral philosophy itself. While religion at least looks at these questions, while politics does not. And I think people are almost searching in the wrong place when they search for their values and identity in politics itself, especially modern politics.
I think that I don't like talking about politics, especially on stream. But personally, with my I don't really do a lot with politics. I just vote, which is probably the most important thing you can do regarding politics. But the way I approach politics is just simply the question: what best advances the gospel?
Sure.
To me, the gospel. And I think the Christians, they should say the gospel is the most important thing. So I kind of just look at it: what best advances the gospel? So I think one of the most challenging things we have to deal with especially with engaging people in our generation, is showing them what Christianity is. So to further illustrate, we had the murder of George Floyd, all the stuff that happened afterwards, and there were Christians who were saying Black Lives Matter and posting the black squares, and people were going after them, and then there were people who were saying all lives matter and ignoring the Black Lives Matter, and Christians were going after them, and the non-Christians who support the movement, which is just about everyone, were going after them as well. And like we just have this like bad stigma almost. Like it seems like there's a lot of people who look at this and they'll say Christians aren't really concerned about African Americans and social injustice, which Christians are. Like, but I think sometimes we can give the appearance, like some people can give that appearance that they just don't care with the way that they say things, because they don't really realize like what it might look like in someone else's eyes. So like it's a very complex issue. But how do you think as Christians we should like approach like reaching these people that may say Christians are a bunch of hypocrites who don't support Black Lives Matter and they don't like black, which obviously is not true, but it's something that people think about Christianity based off of their interpretations of what some Christians said. So where do you go with people like that? Like, how can we show the love of Christ to them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue is this idea of tribalism. And there's a book I have on my bookshelf called Hidden Worldviews, and they almost go through like 8 worldviews people hold to in Western culture. But you identify with this particular notion or group. You can take Black Lives Matter, for example. I think they have the right message. Yeah, racism is bad. It's literally just a genetic fallacy. It's a logical fallacy. So like, logically it's bad and morally it's bad. But I think a lot of the time people who support that group and are in that group treat it as only Black Lives Matters because they shun other people. Because I'm white, I can't have bad experiences apparently or complain about those. I don't think we should ultimately complain about things that we can't control or even control ourselves, because I think that just makes things worse. And my proof for that is just look at what happened. Look at people's reactions to the whole George Floyd thing. They're complaining about things that they really can't control. And yeah, it's an injustice. And, you know, I think these riots and looting is never justified no matter what. I think, especially if you're looting stores that aren't, you know, institutional, just local businesses, that's just ridiculous. And people like that need to be prosecuted. But I think if, let's say, because I watched a great movie. I forget what it was called. It was with Michael B. Jordan, not the basketball player, the actor. I used to think that Michael B. Jordan, the basketball player, played Killmonger.
I wish.
But I think it was called Mercy.
I have no idea about movies.
Yeah,
so don't ask me.
He's a lawyer, and they go through all the corrupt, the corrupt court system of Alabama, and the pure interracism in there. And like, it's a great movie. And, you know, it's based on testimony, you know, actual cases and so on. Like, people should be rioting over that stuff in Alabama, not over one injustice. And they haven't even gone to court yet. I would be like, yeah, let's definitely protest. Well, protesting is fine, but riot would be necessary with the Minneapolis police station at that point, and the court system, if the court system went through and, you know, gave them an innocent verdict because of their police status. And at that point, it's just like, yeah, no, that's injustice. And at that point, I think rioting and protesting is necessary in that area. Don't affect other areas and don't make it a nationwide problem. It's obviously a corrupt thing in the station or the police station itself or whatever, or with just the individuals. I think people are drawing way too many conclusions. And just to get to my main point, I think people rely on their own understanding of things and do not look beyond their scope of perspective. And that's just the whole idea of relativism and pluralism. Look to your own understanding and what suits you best and how you perceive reality. Don't look into a different perspective and see if there's absolute truth and a way I should live my life. No, I should live my life I want to live it and not live it how I should. And I think because of that, you just get all these ridiculous ideas that pop out. And, you know, the internet is not a good idea for that. And all these ideas just spread over. And you can start a movement like this. I mean, just look at the past 2 weeks. I mean, because imagine if this happened early 2000, in which the internet wasn't really a thing yet. I think there would be a lot less controversy, because bad ideas can get out fast. I'm not saying don't protest like at all, but rioting in other towns like my own Pittsburgh and affecting other people, many black officers who have been killed and many other, you know, people who have gotten hurt who did nothing to deserve that in these loots, riots, and everything, and burning buildings down, I think it's just morally wrong at that point. And I think people just make these idols. I think they make their self-understanding an idol. And at that point, you're almost willing to believe anything that sounds good to you. And that's dangerous. And I think that's almost how just bad societies happen, how most sin happens. And again, it's a sin issue. It's a problem with the individual, not, well, the whole collective group, humanity overall is sinful. I won't obviously make one race or not. I think the entire human race is sinful at one point. And it will always be sinful if not seeking God and seeking their own understanding. But I think foundationally, if people have self-understanding as that, I think it leads to stuff like this. Did I answer your original question, or did I just go to the place?
I think you did, and then kind of went off a little bit. But I mean, you don't. There's no script here. We can talk about anything. I just think on what you said. I mean, I think people take advantage of good intentions, and I think that's kind of what we saw with the riots. But I mean, let's not get into that because that's
sure.
Talking about doubts. Before we go into Q&A, do you have any last thoughts you want to give before we answer a few questions?
Yeah, if you're going through doubts, don't rely on your own self-understanding because you're not in the right mood to be thinking about truth and the goodness of God. Seek counsel, especially if you're a Christian. Go to your local church, and if they don't help, then seek other friends or Christians who are close to you. Especially if you're in a youth group, definitely talk to your youth group leader. Try and develop that relationship. Let me tell you, when you rely on your own self-understanding, I think that's when depression and anxiety, if it's not like a biological thing, I think if you just focus on those doubts, I think that just results from that. Don't let the doubts control you. It's okay to cry. It's okay to go through the emotions. I've been there. Everyone has at one point, but you can't let it control you. Don't doubt the goodness of God. And at this point in your life, you have to make a serious decision if you're intellectually convinced, of course. Don't let emotional doubts control your intellect because that's also very bad. Make the important decision, should I follow Christ, and actually give that a go since I'm at the worst time of my life. Should I be Job and place my faithfulness in God even though all this horrible stuff has happened to me?
All right, man. Let's look at some Q&A. I see 3 questions, and if anyone wants to add anything, feel free to ask it. And we're going to go for about 60 minutes max is kind of the plan because StreamYard, free plan. Skeptical Man says back to the beginning. I'll let you answer first, John. I'll kind of add stuff at the end if I see something that he's added. He says, how strong is your confidence in Christianity on a scale from 0 to 100?
Yeah, the problem with these Pine Creek questions is this. Talking about on an intellectual level, because he does not believe that it is all purely intellectual and philosophical and so on. He thinks it's mostly emotional. Then he asks people these types of questions, and it's just like, were you talking about their emotions or intellectually convinced? So am I subjectively convinced and satisfied with Christianity? And is my confidence in the sense of my trusting in that, or are you talking purely intellectual? And if my intellectual is just excuses for emotions, then you have to clarify that. But for me, I'll say intellectually, I don't know, 85, 90% maybe. If I had to go lower, 80%, if that. Emotionally, when the emotions control, it can go down pretty low, 20, 10%. But, I think there's too many hidden assumptions that aren't clear in these types of questions.
Okay. I mean, if we're going to quantify it, I mean, I'm probably in the high 90s. I mean, there's times where I'll dip into 50, 60, 70, 80. But I mean, I think when you go down there and you doubt and you find the answers to these questions, it just strengthens your faith. BDS says, how's it going? Says, isn't the problem of hiddenness a common source of doubts?
It almost is the number one source of emotional doubts because you pray to God. And because you've made this an idol, you let that control your life, and it blinds you. And I think, God is hidden to me. No, I think you've made God hidden to yourself. Whether consciously, I think most of the time it's unconsciously. But because of that decision you made, it results from that. And I think people's epistemologies are tainted with this bad foundation of emotions. But, certain people, I totally get it. If, they've gone through something horrible. And the emotions are very powerful. And that's where the intellect side. Like IP's video on divine hiddenness is great. I don't remember how he deals with it emotionally, but like just blowing it off as, oh, it's just a subjective argument from it's the atheist argument from testimony. Yeah, when it's the Matt Dillahunty approach, sure, but these are serious issues, and I think at this point, they're not in the right state to be thinking about, the intellectual questions. I think they need to deal with the emotions first, and then actually look at it if those doubts are still there on this, or questions, I would say, on this level.
All right, let's keep going. Nick Quiet, what's up, Nick Quiet? Shout out to the Synergist podcast. He says, this is a big question. We can spend a long time talking about it, but let's try to keep it kind of short-ish. He says, how does anxiety and depression impact doubt?
I think it speeds it up if I think it definitely makes it worse and speeds it up. Because some people, like David Wood, with how he is, he just doesn't care about things like that. It's just like it doesn't really affect him that much. He's almost purely intellectual. But with people with this, I think because of that, then they just start doubting the goodness of God because they have this in the first place. And with people like that, you just need to be a patient, good friend to them. And I think that's the best remedy for anxiety and depression, knowing that you have people there who care about you and stuff, and who help deal with your physical needs as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've dealt with, not at an extreme level, but somewhat. And I think that it just depends on the person. Like, every person is different. I think that anxiety and depression can make us doubt God more, cause more doubts. And I think that it's important that we have active strategies and people we can talk to kind of like bring us through these things. Because I think there's a lot of good truth in the Bible. Like, if we look at this kind of goes into the next question from Roxby, the Psalms, like there's just so much good information in the Psalms that if we don't just read the Psalms as poems, but understand them as prayers and petitions to God, it just helps us so much more as we deal with things such as like doubts and anxieties and depressions. Because David seems like he was struggled from anxiety or depression or both somewhat. If you read the Psalms, so I think there's a lot of things you can look at here. Very real important objection. Did you have a thought you wanted to add on that?
Yes, I think the biggest issue is our state of mind, and I think almost a sense of pride can end up developing from these doubts, and they can give you a sense of entitlement. So firstly, read Proverbs and learn the way of the fool versus the way of the wise, and that helps a lot. Then from there, I'm reading through Ecclesiastes, and that also deals with problems as well. It just gives you realism in how life can be. Obviously, Ecclesiastes before the gospel and New Hope and so on, but like that also helps. I just go through all the wisdom literature. I'm halfway through Job. I started Job like 4 days ago. Then I'm probably going to read through Psalms. But you were talking about Psalms. People complain about Psalm 131 where, it talks about smashing the Babylonian children's heads and whatnot. That's a lament psalm, and that's not a command. That's just how David feels. And he's saying this to God because this is talking about, I believe this takes after the destruction of Israel or Jerusalem, like 576 or something BC. I probably have the date wrong there. But, David, Solomon, the psalmist, depending on, who wrote the psalm, they always have these lament, and they're describing how they feel. They've gone through many emotions. And I'm glad you brought that up, Zach, because that hasn't occurred to me until now. I may use that in these videos when
I totally lost what you said there for a second.
Oh, I'm glad that you brought up the Psalms because, it reminded me of lament poems, lament psalms, and, crying out to God in your times of need. And many Christians fail to do that. And a lot of this video is going to be dealing with doubting Christians, but like a lot of it will apply to some of those who have doubted and perhaps may give them a reconsideration to rethink those doubts. But yeah.
Yeah, let's keep going. Probably get 2 more questions in here. Roxby says, if you are struggling with trusting the goodness of God, what are some passages you go to?
All the wisdom literature, the Gospels. I'm trying to think, maybe Paul, maybe 1st and 2nd Timothy, since Paul is in, I believe, the Roman. he's either in his prison home in Rome or is in prison himself, because those are the letters I think typically dated before he's beheaded in 66 or between the late 60s AD. So when he's going through those times of need, there's some stuff that can be dealt with in there. I think Philippians would be a good passage or a good book. I mean, most of the New Testament. James is basically the Proverbs of the New Testament. And also Genesis 1-3, what God created was good, and remembering what God created and how it fell through this first doubting of God. When he doubted the goodness of God, Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and because they doubted, oh, maybe this serpent is right, maybe God just doesn't want us to be like him, so let's be like him. And that egoism, that self-interest, that almost emotional need of wanting to have more power, you could say, resulted to almost where we're at now. But
all right, let's go through before we go through that, I'll give it my thoughts. I think there's two general things that I kind of look at for the goodness of God. Roxby, shout out to Roxby, always here, always appreciate you. The Gospels, number one, and understanding what God did through us through the work of Christ. Like someone in the chat, Romans 5:8, but God demonstrates his own love for us, that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. We can see through the sacrificial work of Christ just how much God loves us, that he's willing to take on the flesh for us. That's something I look at. And then the other thing I think is the Psalms. Like I've been doing, as part of my devotional time, I've been reading through the Psalms every day. I'll read a Psalm or two or three. It just depends. Sometimes it's like 4 Psalms. It's like 3 verses. And other times it's like a tenth of a Psalm it's like Psalms 119, I think, where it's like 200 verses. And just reading through the Psalms, you see David have this like very real struggle with trying to feeling like God's gone and has abandoned him, at the same time praising God and loving God always. So I think there's 2 things that I like to not just read but also memorize. I think memorizing scripture is such a powerful tool for Christians.
Can I add one more thing?
Go for it.
Just don't read it to deal with your need. Read it in how I should change my life, and actually apply it, because I think a lot of Christians will just read scripture and pick 1 verse or 2 verses out that suits them with their emotional needs almost, and then go from there. And that's almost a shallowness, faithfulness I was talking about before. They don't actually apply it to their life decisions and how they should, basically. And I think that's almost another result of all these emotional doubts, because they aren't applying it consistently. And to be fair, I mean, it's almost not their fault with how the church teaches hermeneutics, but
yeah. This will be the last question we go through. I appreciate everyone's questions. Benjamin Bethel, how's it going, Benjamin? He says, how can I get an answer from God? Because when I have questions about my personal life, how can God answer me back? Because I get nothing reading the Bible.
Yeah, I can totally get that. Don't expect a direct voice, because I always used to pray for that. And I think Christians who claim that need to have their brain examined. My own personal opinion, that's harsh, but no, God doesn't communicate that way. I'd say, firstly, look at the Bible and see if it's true. And if it is true, that's God's answer to you. Well, I think God uses things that are relevant in your life on his own timing, of course. So patience is very important. I learned this recently. Let me look at this question some more. I think people use his people, like you've been watching our streams a lot, and maybe God is using us to give you answers to these questions. I think God definitely uses people. I think that's just clear through the gospel. So I don't know the specifics of your personal life, Benjamin, and those are yours. But I just say to keep seeking truth and start with the dude who claimed to be the truth, Jesus, and see how his words can change your life. And I wouldn't look for a voice from God. I'd look to what I believe he has revealed to us, and should be our main source. Yeah,
I think there's a lot that you could say here. A few things, Benjamin. First thing I would say, I mean, I don't know what you are doing, but the first thing I'd say is give it to God. Like whatever you have going on, just give this to God. Like if it's a doubt or a relationship you should be in, or I don't know, whatever's going on, just give that to God. Just say, God, I'm giving this question I don't know have an answer to you, and I'm going to put this on you. It's just cast all our anxieties on him because he cares for you. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would say is talk to people you trust. Like whatever this question is, find whether it's a pastor or a youth pastor or a Christian friend. Find someone who has a relationship with God that you can like talk to about this whatever you have going on. And the third thing I'd say, I've been harping on this a lot through the stream, but read the Psalms. Like there's so much good information in the Psalms. Like David, who God brought him, like God got David out of a field feeding sheep. And God worked so much in David's life, so obviously, and he still struggled with doubting God, and questioning God's goodness and God's presence and things like that. So read the Psalms, get in the mind of David, and I think it can help you a lot through these doubts. John, it's been a great conversation, man. Any last thoughts you can add, and plug all of your stuff, your Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, anything you want to know for people who want to follow you and John Dunfee.
Any social media thing you can think of, it's always JMD Apologetics 101, except on Twitter without the 101. If people are having doubts, they can always reach me on social media, message me on there a lot, mostly for ministry stuff. Hey, I want to do this because I care for people. And after experiencing it myself, I hate people. Just the thought of people going through that, it makes me care and want to help people. And any way I can help is satisfying to me. But my video will be more structured. So like I'll usually give answers. I'll give a lot of good thoughts and stuff, but like I don't usually have it in a list format or a structure itself. But I'd say wait for this video and take God more seriously in your life. And I'm not saying people haven't, but like in these times you have to. And I think God meets us at our worst. I think we see that with Job.
Yeah, man, it's been a great stream. Thank you everyone for tuning in. BDS, Roxby, Sahi, Luke, Benjamin, everyone else who's been here. We'll see you guys on Monday. I'm going to be talking with Eric Hernandez about the philosophy of the mind. Should be a lot of fun. But that's it for now. If you're new here, so you can follow us at AA Apologetics on Twitter, Adherent Apologetics on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And that is it. And if you want to, you can support us at patreon.com/Adherent Apologetics. We are only, I believe, $175 away from being fully funded. So that's really exciting. But that's it, everyone. Thanks for doing this, John. It's been a lot of fun. Really good conversation, man.
Definitely.
And Spartan Theology, you missed a good one, my boy. God bless.